Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Pros Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Harris. Find me on Twitter at DanHarris80. You know, it's a good week, guys, when you get to hear from someone at Pitcher List. You know what's like one of the top 4 weeks in the history of weeks everywhere? When you get to talk to 2 people from Pitcher List. And that's what we've got right now. Earlier this week, we talked to Nick Pollack about some undervalued early to mid-round pitchers. Today, we're going to talk about some late-round starting pitcher gambles. And to join us is Alex Fast. Find him on Twitter at AlexFast8. Alex, thanks for popping on the show. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for that introduction. I'm glad you guys gave me the back half. I think these are more fun. These are a little bit, easier to dive into. Nick got the hard stuff, like, debating over DeGrom or Cole or Bieber. That's like the tough stuff. We get the fun stuff because, hey, if we go wrong, just drop them. Find someone else on the wire. You're going to be totally fine.
To be fair, Nick kind of squeaked outside of the top 200, and if I didn't cut him off, he would have just basically taken this entire show, and it would have been like a 5-hour show. I was like, nah, man, let's keep it. Let's leave a little something.
Welcome to my every Tuesday. Welcome to my every Tuesday night recording with Nick Pollack. Sometimes I just have to leave the apartment and hope that at some point he'll stop.
You do what you got to do. All right. So look, we're going to talk, as we said, about some late round. We're going to try to basically go beyond the top 200 in ADP. So before we get into it, I want to talk to you guys about 2 things. Number 1 is our cheat sheet creator. It's exactly what it sounds like. You can create a rankings cheat sheet. So here are the benefits. You can combine rankings from your favorite experts into one cheat sheet, okay? Or you can just import rankings from off the web if you have them that you like. You can add tiers and you can add player notes, and you can use them in our draft wizard to practice and our draft assistant when you can have them with you at your draft. So it's at fantasypros.com/draft wizard. Look, I use it myself. I create a cheat sheet, my own rankings, of course, but I add my tiers. I import it into the draft assistant, and every year, not this year because of the situation that we're dealing with, of course, in the world, but every other year, TGFBI, those drafts take place when I'm on vacation with my family because New Hampshire has a different vacation week than every other state. I think it's to maximize ski revenue. I'm not 100% on that, but we do. We have a different one, and it's every week. I'm on a beach, so I always sync it up with the draft assistant so I can make sure I have everything there. It's awesome. fantasypros.com/draft wizard. Now, Alex, number 2, before we get into it, I do want to say you are an Orioles fan, correct?
I am indeed. I purposefully changed. I was wearing like a shirt from a Cincinnati brewery, and I changed into my old Nick Markakis jersey. One of my favorite old Orioles t-shirts.
I mean, that's class. That's class is what it is. You're on video. You need to bring it up. So, well, he no longer plays for your team, but I assume you have fond memories of Manny Machado, correct?
I do. I was just thinking about him today and all of the things that he did earlier on. Remember there were the incidents with Matt Chapman with letting go of the bat, which was crazy. There was the really intense fight with the Yordano Ventura, who he sadly lost way too early. One of the most electric pitchers in baseball at the time. And now there's a totally different narrative about Manny Machado. So obviously this podcast isn't about Manny Machado, but it's very funny you say that because I was thinking about him today.
Well, in honor of your appearance, we are actually going to give away a signed Manny Machado jersey to one lucky listener. I'm kidding. It has nothing to do with the fact. Well, I'm not kidding about the fact that we're giving it away. I'm kidding about the fact that it has anything to do with you appearing on this podcast. We were going to do it regardless, even if you canceled. But we are giving away a signed Manny Machado jersey. Now, look, here's the deal. To be entered, leave a review for the show on Apple Podcasts or CastBox. An honest review. Say whatever you want. Just leave a review and then go to fantasypros.com/MLB contest. That's all. MLB contest. It runs through February. And look, if I see an entry from Alexander Ask, I'm gonna know it's you. Okay.
I was gonna say I'm gonna rip this podcast to shreds and then try and get that jersey.
Oh man. Well, it is random, so I wouldn't know actually if that's what it was. But anyway, that's what's going on right now. That runs through February. So go ahead, leave your review. Go to fantasypros.com/MLB contest. All right, let's get into it. Outside the top 200, we're talking about late round, gambles here. So again, as you mentioned, Alex, nobody can hold it, against us. These aren't guys who you are drafting to be absolute rock stars for your team, but there's a lot of upside with a lot of players who are going in this range. So start it off, talk about whoever you want.
Yeah, okay. So I guess we can start with one of the guys who I've talked about before on some other shows, brought up on MLB Network before he re-signed, and someone that I'm pretty interested in, especially at the current ADP outside of the top 200, and that's Marcus Stroman. The biggest thing to happen for Marcus Stroman this offseason may not have necessarily been the announcement of the new split change coming, which is really exciting, but maybe it's actually the improvement he received defensively in Francisco Lindor. Ahmed Rosario made a lot of strides defensively last year, so I don't want to take away too much from him there, but there are only a couple shortstop I think an SP would rather have behind him, maybe like Baez and Story, maybe Tatis. So that's really a big thing for Stroman. Getting to his arsenal, we talked about that splitter. I brought up that splitter. There's a great writer at Pitcherlist named Michael Ahedo. He wrote in a fantastic piece about how Stroman, this could be a really nice addition for him for his arsenal, as the changeup he's toyed with before didn't really have enough of a difference in terms of a movement profile to really be truly impactful. Stroman himself says that he's going to debut a new four-seamer as well. I think what gets me excited about him at this price is it seems the floor is pretty baked in. There was, of course, the terrible 2018 of Stroman with a 5.54 ERA and the near 1.5 whip, but I really genuinely do not believe that to be his real floor. Realistically, his absolute floor to me is a mid to high 4 ERA guy with like a 17% K rate. The ceiling, however, at pick 225 or wherever it is now, 236 around there, is really fantastic. Let's say that splitter doesn't really work and the four-seamer doesn't take any drastic steps forward. You're still left with a really good slider and a sinker that can induce ground balls. This is a guy who has never had a FIP above 4. He's obviously going to get you some wins this year as well, too. So, yeah, for me, Marcus Stroman, pretty good pick at that value. How about you?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love that pick. Now, I want to say I feel like you're being a little modest because out of curiosity, where did you hear that he was going to be introducing a new four-seam fastball?
Yes, I think he responded to me on Twitter. I actually genuinely forgot about that. Yes, I think he did do that.
Man, I can't believe you forgot. Yes, you had this awesome just overlaying basically all of his various pitches. One of those brilliant graphics that I love. And he responded to you and said that he's got the new four seam and split change coming too, which is great. And yeah, the split change, as you mentioned, I think it's from Gazelman probably is where he's getting it from, which is great. I mean, it will add, but yeah, you talked about it. It is really the defense because, you don't need me to tell you that he induces a lot of ground balls, career 58.7% ground ball rate. So again, when he went to the Mets, he had a huge BABIP jump, right? Which is obvious because the Mets infield defense stinks and has just not been good for a while. Adding Lindor is going to be a huge benefit. You know what I wish they would do? And I'm a Mets fan, so I wish they would do a lot of things. And I'm not kidding. If they sign Trevor Bauer while we're on this podcast, I'm just like putting my hands up and I'm out, okay? Because there are all these rumors going on right now. I've got my notifications set on Twitter. But I wish somebody other than JD Davis would be playing third, right? Because, it's not a huge, Lindor more than makes up for it. Lindor is just an overall increase, but that is the only part of it that makes me annoyed, frankly, for Stroman's outlook. But overall, I love him. I usually like him. He's a guy who I like. And again, do you expect, you may know more about this than I do. Do you expect there to be a universal DH this year? Do you think that's just not going to happen?
Man, that's such a great question. I personally don't think it's going to happen at this point. I don't know any more than the other guy. I would be a little bit surprised. I mean, theoretically, it would be something that the MLBPA would be willing to talk about because, I mean, obviously we've seen guys like Marcelo Zuna not have the market develop for him because we just don't know, right? We don't have any idea if that universal DH is coming. I don't know how these things work. If I'm speaking, totally off the top of my head, those things can obviously be bargaining tools. And with the CBA coming up, I just don't know how it's going to shake out. But you brought up an interesting point too about JD Davis and the defense and him coming to the Mets. One thing that the Mets did that I didn't love when Stroman came over is they dropped his slider usage pretty drastically. I would really love it if they let him throw that slider more because in 2019 when he got traded to the Mets, he was throwing it in an all-time high and he had the highest swinging strike rate of his career. He came to the Mets and they're like, nah, bring back that sinker. Yeah, don't worry. We're going to put Jeff McNeil around here somewhere. He'll get there. So I'm hoping maybe they amp up that slider usage again, and then hopefully JD Davis, it doesn't even matter. Maybe it just all goes right to Francisco Lindor. Here's hoping.
And he did strike out, more batters with the Mets than he did with the Blue Jays. Of course, he was striking out more in a batter per inning. And if there is no DH, as I expect, and I think you had it right. I mean, it's a bargaining chip at this point. I think the Players Association wants it for the exact reason that you said. It opens up jobs for guys that are there. But in the end, it is a huge bargaining chip with labor dispute. Hopefully not, but, on the horizon, they probably want to hold it. So at this point, I'm not necessarily expecting universal DH. And again, that just, brass tacks kind of benefits Stroman from the fact that he remains in the National League after pitching in the AL East. So I love the call. Absolutely. I like him every single year. I certainly am more intrigued than ever coming into this year. So I'm going to go with a guy who's being drafted around the same spot. He's the 66th pitcher off the board in consensus ADP, 219th overall. That's Eduardo Rodriguez. So he obviously missed all of last year with very, very serious concerns that arose because of COVID. He developed heart issues. I mean, you read about it. It sounded very, very scary, but everything right now sounds very good, sounds very positive for him to have a very normal season coming into 2021. And I think that if he shows up in spring training and he looks healthy and everything looks fine, that this ADP is going to rise. But for me, given the positive signs right now, I'm good to go. We know what we're getting from this guy, right? This isn't something where I'm like, ooh, there's a new pitch I'm excited about, or something's going to change. It's just, you kind of know what you're going to get from this guy, and it's pretty decent to go into the back of a fantasy rotation. Last 3 seasons, 419, 382, 381 ERA. His whip the last 3 seasons, 128, 126, 133. Strikeout percentage, 25.8, 26.4, 24.8. Walk percentage, 8.6, 8.1, 8.7. He limits hard contact pretty consistently. The average exit velocity in MLB is 88.3 miles per hour. Never had a season above 87.9. Average hard hit rate, 34.9%. He's never given up above a 33%. So we know what this is. Usually you're looking for upside a lot when you get this late. That's not really what this is. There isn't a ton of upside here as far as I can see. But I think that generally speaking, what pushes his ADP down in a normal season is concerns about innings, right? He had the 203 and a third in 2019, but before that, he had never thrown more than 137 and a third. That's fine. But this year, everyone has innings concerns because you had the weird year from last year. So the Red Sox aren't going to be great. It's a tough division, all of that. But again, at this point, this late, I think his ADP is currently kind of depressed a little bit because of the health concerns, and he's a guy who I'm willing to draft and assume that I'm going to be able to stick him kind of in the back of my fantasy rotation.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think you hit the nail on the head, and it's actually the exact same argument that I've made with Nick on our own podcast, which is the consistency, right? I mean, you stated all of those various metrics and how the standard deviation between all of them is very, very minimal. Swinging strike rate is the exact same, 11.6, 11.1, 11.7. So that sort of consistency is really exciting because theoretically, even if you take all of those things and regress them a little bit, because obviously he was dealing with those, really scary things in 2020, even if you regress them a little bit, you're still talking about a low 4 ERA guy who's still going to be on a very good offense, who's still going to get a good amount of wins from a fantasy perspective. That's obviously very, very important. Last year in 2019, he was being drafted around pick 150. That to me was a bridge too far. Now that he's fallen outside of the top 200, I'm definitely a little more interested in drafting Erod.
Yeah, let's make that clear. Okay, this is not somebody who I think like, oh, go make sure you get him in round 11 or round. No, I mean, you can wait. But where he's going right now, again, I think that once spring training starts, assuming that he does, he shows he's healthy, it is just going to go up his ADP. And again, this is sort of something that I talk about. So many fantasy managers, they just want to shoot the moon. When they get to this point, right, they're beyond pick 200. They just want to go for upside. And there is a lot of upside. And we're going to talk about some of those guys, of course, that are gambles. But guys like Stroman, who does have upside, Rodriguez not as much. But guys like that are guys you can draft and you can just say, I know what I'm going to get from these guys as a floor. And those are guys who I can stick at the back of my rotation. You need those guys too. So you don't always have to go for the home run play. So that's why I like Erod there. Let's go to your number 2. Who do you got?
Well, sticking with that exact theme, I'm going to bring up another guy who's not necessarily a home run, but is a guy who I think is important to draft or his type because they're going to be fence posts for your fantasy team over the course of the year, right? And that's Zach Davies. Zach Davies had arguably the best season of his career last year. His K rate went over 20 for the first time in his career, probably the only time it's going to happen. Swinging strike rate over 10% for the first time in his career with a minimum of 50 innings pitched. ERA was the lowest of his career at 2.73. FIP was the lowest of his career, minimum 50 innings pitched, 3.88. So what do we know about that, right? Is this just short season? Does he just get lucky over 50 innings and we call it a day and it's probably not going to happen again? I think the only way we can answer that question is if we look at his usage rates, right? Look at his velocity, see what changed, what led to this success. Now, there really were no changes in terms of velocity. One of the biggest changes was the changeup going from 31% to 41%, which is a career high from him. The sinker dropping from 53 to 42%. The batted ball performances on both of those pitches largely maintained, but the swinging strike, I think, was much better for that changeup. He started throwing the changeup in 2-strike counts over 50% of the time. That was far and away a high for him. He also got a career high in called strikes, along with that 20% swinging strike rate. That surpassed 20% for the first time since 2016 as well. One of the things that's really, really exciting to me about Zack Davies with that changeup, he is not afraid to throw it same-handed, right? That sometimes is like a big no-no in baseball because of these kind of vague old school rules that you learn when you're coming up talking about pitching, blah, blah, blah. I get it, like, throw it out. Like, I hate it. Like, the fact that he's not doing that, the fact that, that he's not following those old rules and he is going with the same-handed changeups, I think is really, really exciting. He also added some movement to the cutter. I think that was really beneficial for him as well. Listen, Zack Davies is not going to be a sub-3 ERA guy for you again, right? Especially with the arsenal that he has. But I do think the strides that he made are better than some people are letting on. A lot of the projection systems have him over a 4.7 ERA with a few around 4.2. That to me is a little bit too high. I think he's obviously going to have a really good defense behind him with Javier Baez behind him in Chicago. So yeah, I think he's an interesting guy that if you're going to draft a lot of upside early on, or you're one of those guys who, you know, wants the Nate Pearsons, wants the Michael Kopechs, wants the Christian Javiers or whatever.
Why are you stealing everybody on my list? Why are you bashing those guys, man?
I'm doing the shake and bake. I'm setting you up so you can say, hey, you get Zack Davies, you can also get the guys. Yeah, we're going to talk about those guys in a bit, but yeah. I'm a little bit interested in Zack Davies at this price.
It is fascinating. I hadn't looked at the projection systems before you mentioned it. Steamer has him at a 5.28. 5.28 ERA. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not, this is not now. He did have, oddly enough, I know he had the FIP of 388 last year and the XFIP of 414. He did have an xERA on StatCast of 501, so that is a little high. And it's not that different than what his career FIP was 422 coming in to the season. So it's not like he outperformed it or improved that much, but it was the changeup. That was something that was interesting. I like the way he pitches. I like all that. And you're right. This is not an upside play. You're 100% right. But yeah, if people are thinking that he's going to be at a 4.8 ERA, which so many of the projection systems have him at, I mean, the bat is at 4.79 as well. That's too much. Like that's too high for me even before he you're right, started leaning on the changeup a little bit. Now, I will say he's going 216th overall in consensus and the 65th starter. There are some sites like Fantrax right now. He's going at 165. That I don't get, right? I mean, would you agree with me that at that point you're like, no, you're giving up too much upside at that point?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a little bit too high because at that point, not only do you need him to perform not as well as last year because he's not going to have that sub-3 ERA, but you're not taking into any account any BABIP fluctuations or anything like that. So I think that's a little bit too high. I think the other thing too is like, obviously, the Cardinals just improved by getting Nolan Arenado. Even with the addition of Nolan Arenado, they still project to be a sub-500 team or something like crazy. I think the last projection was like 79 and 83 or something like that. So that division isn't the offensive powerhouse that it used to be, too. So that's going to benefit Davies as well.
Oh, absolutely. When you're talking about it, he was traded to the Cubs in the offseason. When you talk about the NL Central, that's a division that you can pick on in a lot of the same way that you can do it with the AL Central. That's actually one of the reasons Nick and I were joking. He talked about Maeda, and I like Maeda very much, of course, this year, but he's not going to get to purely pitch against the AL and NL Central. He's going to have to go a little beyond. So that is going to add to it a little bit. So let me ask you something, because I know I saw you tweeted out that I think you said you just finished your top 100 starting pitcher rankings. Is that right?
Yes. Okay. After weeks of hell, it's now over.
It's a terrible process, right?
Yes, it is.
Oh my gosh. It is a terrible, terrible process trying to figure out what to do with last year. So I don't know if you have them out in front of you. Do you know where you have Davies overall? It's okay if you don't.
No, I do. I have it right in front of me. I actually had him at 80th overall. So for me, he's like in a very interesting tier of Jake Odorizzi and J.A. Happ. Just guys that like aren't the sexiest plays, but they're going to be able to, probably keep the ERA down and get a good amount of innings while doing it.
I like it. And again, you need guys like that. And, and it's something, the one thing to keep in mind about that guy, Nick and I, again, we talked about this a little bit when I went on a crazy rant about why people hate Kyle Hendricks and why I hate all those people. But if you do draft guys like this, you have to be cognizant of the fact that they're not going to strike out a ton of guys and you have to build your team accordingly. But you can do that so long as you know that going in. Like if you're taking Hendricks, if you're taking a guy like Davies, you have to be considering whether the rest of your staff is going to be able to make up for the probable lack of strikeouts. Now, again, Davies struck out more than 8 batters per 9 innings, a strong increase from what he's done over his career. But again, even you, right, Alex, you're not expecting him to really hit that mark again, right?
No, I'm not. And I am so happy that you brought up Kyle Hendricks. I mean, and maybe I misspeak. I said today that like a lot of analysts were out on him, and I don't think they necessarily are anymore. I think I might be the high guy on him at 20, but Justin Mason came out with his top 100. He's up there in the 20s. Same with Paul Sporer. Nick's probably going to have him around there too. But the thing about Hendricks too, that I think you bring up such a great point, like, in a year with so much volatility where we can't trust 2020 numbers that much, you know what I mean? Yep. Why wouldn't you go with a guy who has done it for his entire career? Put that in there, and then you could take risks later on.
I have him every year anyway, but especially because I'm not kidding. Fantasy managers across the board just don't like him. And you do have to be. We were talking about it in TGFBI last year where I drafted him like much later than I would have had him. It's because I started my team with strikeout pitchers, and I knew that I could absorb the lack. But yeah, that's a guy who's never had an ERA over 3.46 once or whatever, never a whip over 1.19. That's stability that you want. And a guy like Davies, again, not a sexy pick at this point, but he is somebody who's just going to give you kind of the reliable numbers so long as you factor in some of his limitations. All right, so now let's shoot the moon. Now let's go upside all day long, all night long. Nate Pearson, the 68th pitcher, 224 off the board. So this is the upside play. Missed most of 2018 with a fracture in ulna. He dominated in 2019 across 3 minor league levels, 2.30 ERA, 0.89 whip, plenty of strikeouts, and he impressed in spring training. There was a lot of buzz about him before the delay. Then he missed time last year with elbow soreness once the season restarted. Only 18 innings, not that great, but there's just no doubting his pure raw stuff. Triple-digit fastball, dominant slider, excellent curveball and changeup. He's just really, really difficult to hit. So there's risk with any young pitcher, especially a power pitcher like this, whether or not they're going to be able to harness it right off the bat. But there's so much upside. Now, there is a question for me. It seems to be like everybody's just assuming that he's in the rotation. Right now, it does look like it. I mean, but they've got Ryu, they've got Robbie Ray, they've got Tanner Roark. They traded for Steven Matz. There's still Ross Stripling there. They've got Anthony Kay waiting. So I don't know if it's necessarily guaranteed if he has a rough spring training necessarily, but I'm drafting him now, and it's worth the upside. There are the innings questions, of course. I mean, the last 4 seasons, 20 innings, 1 2/3 innings, 101 2/3, and then last year just 18. But again, this is the type of year where there are innings concerns everywhere. So they don't mean quite that much to me with a guy like Pearson. So again, this is an upside play. You got to feel comfortable with your rotation. You got to know that this may not work out in any way for you. But for me, I'm getting shares of Nate Pearson this year.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about him quite yet. I mean, for me, I'm a little more risk averse in how I draft. So for me, he's kind of a guy where I'm like, I'm going to let some other owner deal with the headache. I have no qualms whatsoever with the other stuff. You are 100% correct. The stuff is absolutely electric. Even if we don't see the fastball velocity maintain over the course of a full year, we're talking about a pitch that's likely still going to average 95, 96 over the course of the year. The slider's really good as well. I think we can see him be like a 23, 24% K rate guy. Yeah. Some command issues. Obviously, the injury's a little bit scary. The right elbow tightness he had at some point is a little bit scary. When I hear right elbow tightness from a young pitcher who's throwing 100 miles an hour, then that's a little bit scary. I will say this, Nick has been making a big deal about beginning of the season, strength of schedule stuff, and I don't know what his schedule is at the beginning of the year, but really, if you're getting a guy like Pearson and you're getting him around this spot where it's later on in the 200s, that's not bad because all you really need is the first couple starts anyway, and you could theoretically replace him with whatever pitcher is going to be hot on the waiver wire. I think that's the one thing people really forget. The value you get on the waiver wire is much better than you think. There's always one guy who's going to come up with a sub 3.5 ERA on the waiver wire. So as long as you're ready to pounce on that guy, then I'm more comfortable taking Pearson.
Yeah, it's funny. I tell this story every once in a while, but I have a close friend who was so angry that somebody kept succeeding in our fantasy leagues, and his draft was never great. He took a lot of shots, but he was so huge on the waiver wire early on, especially. And my friend always used to say, well, it's not fair because he drafts such a bad team that he can just drop all these guys when they go south and pick up all these guys on the waiver wire. And I have good players and I have to hold on to them the whole time. Like, That I was like, that's a terrible argument.
Yeah.
But, right. But the whole point is, especially when you do this, the upside is huge, but it is a guy who you can get away from if you absolutely need to. And if you can, you're right. I mean, so many managers are just like the draft is, of course, a giant part of fantasy baseball success. But the waiver wire, especially early on when you can make a real impact, that's there too. So yeah, Pearson, again, is a guy, once we're past pick 200, again, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to just shoot the moon with all of your picks. But if you do try to do that at that point, you can easily make up for it because it's not as if you're passing on, man, I should have taken this guaranteed star here after pick 200. So I think it's fine to do it. And again, we're talking about guys where you get a little bit of a mix with it. And let's talk about your next guy, who I think is probably going to be a little more on the safer, less upside side, right?
Yeah, right in that same tier is Zach Davies, and that's Jake Odorizzi. I mean, listen, I'm willing to chalk up that 2020 season fully to injury. You know what I mean? And I genuinely don't believe that that's me just trying to pull the analyst of like, well, I want him to be good, so I'm just going to ignore the bad. Like, it's like, you know.
He had 13 innings, too. I mean, you know.
Yeah, it's bad.
Write it off.
Yeah, a chest injury, a blister, like it's all over the place. I think then what you have to do is you have to look at the success that he had in 2019 and why he had it, right? He elevated his fastball more than anyone in the game. He elevated that four-seam fastball 41% of the time in 2019. That led the league with a minimum of 1,000 fastballs. He also returned a 250 WOBA on elevated fastballs, which is fantastic because, especially with his velocity, I mean, it's not a great velocity. And when guys get a hold of four-seamers at the top of the zone, they usually destroy them. So a 250 WOBA there is great. When it came to finding that 250 was in like the shadow zone, by the way. That's what I feel so weird saying the shadow zone all the time. It sounds like some like terrible comic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't the
Sounds
shadow
like you're
a comic?
Superhero. Yes, I think something like that. I don't know. You sound like a superhero to me, so it's fine. Go ahead.
It was like a Billy Zane movie too. Would believe it.
Oh
or
my
not.
gosh.
Yeah,
I've got it now.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Catherine Zeta-Jones like made one of her debuts like in that movie. Oh man, now I'm just thinking about it. Christy Swanson. I've got that whole movie now. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh man, that is very funny. So yeah, for Odorizzi, he went to his cutter 18% of the time in 2019, which is a career high for him as well. It had a 76 WRC plus and a 268 WOBA, which was the sixth best in 2019. You take a look at how well his heater, cutter, and splitter play off of one another. It makes sense why he was able to be so effective in 2019. Obviously, where he ends up is going to drive a lot of that value, but the names that we're hearing attached to him right now are still like Toronto and Tampa Bay, and those teams I'm fine with him going to either of these parks. And I'm fine with him being on either of those teams. So I think at this point, if you're drafting now, if you're doing really early drafts, enjoy the discount on him because as soon as he gets on a team, which he will, he's going to sign somewhere. As soon as he does, that value is going to jump up, or the ADP, I should say.
He's the 106th pitcher, 303 in ADP.
Wow.
I mean, that's nothing. Yeah, that's where he is right now. So he's going to go up. And I'm hearing the Cardinals a lot have interest, which would be, we mentioned it. If you're going to pitch in a division, the NL Central or the AL Central is really where you want to be. So that's a good spot for him. So it's interesting. Do you expect him, because he did have, first of all, there are a couple things, I guess. Number one, I'm surprised at the lack of interest that's going on with him around MLB. I know teams lost money and, with all the COVID stuff, but still, I mean, even if you don't think he's going to be able to repeat what he did in 2019, completely agree with you. 2020, you throw that out the window entirely. Like I said, 13 innings. He was injured the entire time. Who cares? Doesn't even matter, not even considering it. When you look at what he did in 2019, even if you don't think he's going to be able to quite repeat that, he has had a fine major league career that he would be in every single rotation. So I'm a little surprised at the lack of interest that's been going on, but he will sign. You're absolutely right. And if the Cardinals get him, that's a great place for him to be. So it sounds though like what you're saying is that you buy, given the change in how he approached batters, given a little bit of a change in pitch mix, you're buying the increase in strikeout rates, right? He was over 10 per 9 in that, but he had only been above 9 per 9 once before that. So are you buying then this increased strikeout rate? Because that does, if you're buying more into, I think we're going to see closer to 2019 than what we saw in the rest of his career, then that makes him a real bargain there. So is that more of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think because of that utilization in pitch mix, I mean, this is a guy who, was usually putting up around 10% swinging strike rates or 11% swinging strike rates on the four-seamer. In 2019, it jumped all the way up to almost 15%. It was 14.9%. And then the sinker as well, as a result, saw a 15.2% swinging strike rate, which was a career high for him as well. I think as a result of that elevation, That's why we saw that career high in K rate. Do I think he can continue to be a 27% guy? No, but I don't think we're talking about regression down to 21. So if you meet in the middle and talk about 24, 25% with a low 4 ERA, I'll take that all day after pick 300.
Oh, absolutely. The fact that I was surprised because, you sent over a list. So I was like, okay, let me see it. And I looked at the ADP and I was like, what in the world? I mean, I have never been a guy I've never had Odorizzi on a single team. And in 2019, for like the first quarter of the season, I was just like, fade this guy, forget it. I'm never going to buy in. But yeah, you don't have to buy into what he did even in 2019 to basically be like, oh, I'll take him there. So absolutely. I agree with you given his price. I'm going to go to another younger guy here. I talked about him a couple of weeks ago, and it's Dane Dunning. He's the 99th pitcher being drafted, 261 overall. So again, talked about him several weeks ago at this point. Downgrade with the trade to the Rangers. It's a downgrade in team from the White Sox, but it is an upgrade in park now. Where you're going to Texas, you're getting an upgrade in park, and I'm really fascinated by him. And so I'm hopeful that maybe you could shed some light on this. So he misses all of 2019 after Tommy John surgery. Okay, he comes in last year. He makes 7 starts with the White Sox. The overall numbers completely passable and fine. 3.97 ERA. 112 whip, 24.6% strikeout rate. Now, he had a really easy schedule. Again, we talked about the AL Central. Got the Royals twice, Cleveland, the Pirates, Cubs, Tigers. That's fine. But still, you do that in your rookie year. You feel pretty good about it. But it could have been a lot more, and I'm not sure why it wasn't. So he's got the slider, right? That's the money pitch. That's the one that works. Performed really well last year. 135 batting average against, 274 expected slugging percentage against, 43.5% whiff rate. And he, like I kind of expected, leaned into it in his first 3 starts, 28.8%, 26.6%, 28.4%. But then over his last 4, he just got away from it. 19.2, 21.6, 11.5, 15.6. Drop, similar drop in his fastball usage. Instead, he started throwing more changeups, which isn't a great pitch. His swinging strike rate plummeted over those starts. So I guess I don't understand why that was. So I'm going to turn to you in a second to let me know whether or not you can figure that out for me. But if he does go back to throwing the slider more, and I don't mean he has to turn into like Patrick Corbin, okay? I don't mean you have to throw this slider 40% of the time, but the idea that it was like, I'm throwing it in the high 20s and I'm having success, and now I'm going to throw it in the low 20s or in the teens and I'm going to have much less success. I didn't get it unless they were just like, just try some things out, see if you can go deeper into games, maybe. But again, if he does get back, if he does lean into the slider more, then he could have a really, really solid season here with the Rangers. So he's a guy who I'm willing to draft to see what happens.
So we're going to go ahead and do some quick maths here, okay? And while you were talking about this, you definitely piqued my interest. That's very interesting about what is going on with Dane Dunning's slider. When you take a look at the overall chart of it, right, the strike zone plot of that slider, that's a lot of sliders out of the zone, right? He does a pretty good job kind of painting that edge, but it seems like overall the slider does not find the zone. And once again, this is kind of quick maths here.
Back in the napkin, you got it.
Yeah, I'm wondering then if you look at the swing and miss rate on that slider over the course of the season, it drastically drops over the course of the season. So I wonder if people were like, hey, he's just throwing that out of the zone. There's absolutely no reason to swing at it whatsoever. Once again, all conjecture, but that could theoretically be a reason for it. I think when it comes to Dunning, that sinker is obviously his go-to pitch, right? And it's a good pitch theoretically. It's the 4th best pitch by CSW, and it was literally up there with like Chris Bassett and Sonny Gray and Kyle Hendricks. Like, that's insane. When guys made contact with it, it had the lowest WOBA on contact, the lowest WOBA-con in all of baseball at 194. But no pitch in terms of WOBA had a bigger gap between WOBA and ex-WOBA than Dane Dunning's. And that is what scares me. Like, just batted ball stuff coming back to bite him in the butt, a far worse infield defense going to Texas. I mean, like, I don't know what's going on there with that infield defense. So that scares me a little bit in terms of him. See, the outs above average for the White Sox last year on the infield, they were 9th best, and Texas was 25th. So that scares me a little bit.
So, you only ranked your top 100, right? That's where you said. So he can't be in it, right?
He is in there because there is still, he's at 94. So there is still some upside there because theoretically, like you said, that slider is there for him. Maybe he could find that pitch again. I will say, like, and this is purely conjecture once again, I don't know how much I trust the Rangers in terms of pitcher development. We've seen great, like Mike Minor with a 200 strikeout season, obviously Lance Lynn. I don't know how much of that is because of the Rangers, and I'm a little bit scared of how they're going to continue to develop Dane Dunning.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm actually just looking up. I should have had it obviously over to see where I have him, just in case you happen to be the high guy on Dane Dunning when I'm comparing our rankings, and I'm the one who's sort of recommending him. But it looks like I have him. No, I'm way higher. I have him 92, so I'm crushing you. In the high.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Wow, that's so embarrassing, dude.
My God, I can't show my face on this ever again. Right. Okay. So very good. All right. Very good. Let's go to your next guy. Then let's keep it moving so we can get to everybody on our list. Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I've been blabbing a bunch, so I'll keep it quick here about Griffin Canning.
No. We're not going over time. I just want to make sure. I just want to have enough. Go ahead.
No. The biggest fear for me about Griffin Canning is, like, literally, is he going to have an elbow? The good news is he didn't miss any days on the IL with the elbow injury in 2020. The question is, though, he lost a full tick of velocity. Is that COVID related, which it well could be? Is it, just because of the elbow? I'm not quite sure. I think taking him at the back end of drafts is interesting because if he gets hurt or isn't effective, you can go ahead and drop him. Really, when we're talking about his stuff, though, he made a change with that curveball. I think he changed the grip. He said in an Athletic piece, I don't remember the exact name of the guy who published it, but he's a great follow. I think his name is Fabian over at The Athletic, who covers the Angels. He's a tinkerer, which I didn't really know about him. Sometimes I think that's good. Sometimes that scares me because, you want to find a guy who's going to find something and then stick with it as opposed to just keep messing with it. What he found with the curveball, if he can stick with it, that's really, really good. I mean, that's going to help sustain that K rate and maybe help him be the pitcher that we all want him to be. So I think the cost is kind of perfect for him because it's so late that if he does get injured, there are other guys available on the wire. But man, there is some really, really, really nice upside in that arsenal from Griffin Canning.
Yeah, I'm trying to look it up here just to see, because I looked at some splits that he had done, so I'm trying to see whether or not it corresponded. No, it doesn't necessarily look like that. So when I looked at Canning's, I love Canning, by the way. I love this call. This is a guy who I want, again, super late, 104th pitcher overall, 287th. At that point, give me a break. There's plenty of upside with that. And you look, I mean, again, it's such a small sample from last year. Like anything we looked at, you look at a full season, it's still like, well, I don't know if I can take anything from this or not. So when you're going to break that up even further, then you're really just sort of might be grasping at straws. But you look at how he started the year last year and you look at how he finished the year, and he finished really, really well. I'm trying to see whether or not there's kind of a tangible sort of, and he did like up the curveball usage towards the end over the last couple of starts, more 30% his second to last game, 33.7% the game before. But his first 6 starts, 4.88 ERA, 155 whip, 9.9% swinging strike rate, 7.5 K per 9, 5.76 FIP. His last 5 starts, 3.14 ERA, 119 whip, 14.5% swinging strike rate, 10.4 K per 9, and a 299 FIP. So Canning is a guy who, I don't know if you have these guys, Alex, whether there are certain guys, I guess we'll call it confirmation bias. There are guys I just like. There are guys who I like and I want to like, and I want to have a reason to draft. So I'm like, look, I like Canning. I did when he came up. I want to find a reason to basically be really optimistic about what we're going to see from the guy. And so I'm like, well, look at the way he closed the season. Look at that. I haven't dug too deep into it to figure out why that is, but I'm with you. I kind of think that this is a guy who has the chance at least to break out. And again, I think the good part about him is that he kind of combines, other than injury, he combines kind of the floor with the ceiling, right? Like if he's going to give you whatever he's going to give you, it's not going to be that bad, but he's got the ceiling to be a lot better, don't you think?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I mean, hopefully they can just figure out the health thing, right? I mean, at this point, you and I might be signing for the Angels to pitch in their rotation at one point because they're just like gathering guys. But that could be of benefit to him, give him a little extra rest, and then get 130, 140 innings out of him over the course of a full year.
I like it. All right, I'm going to go to another upside play here, and it's Michael Kopech. You mentioned him earlier, the 100th starting pitcher, 264 overall. Weird here, right? Tommy John at the end of 2018 misses all of 2019 because of it, and then he opts out of the 2020 season because of COVID and certain other personal concerns that he had. So that means we're like going on 3 years since the last time we've seen him actually pitch in a meaningful game here, but His stuff, as we've kind of talked about, it's not really in doubt. He's got the ridiculous fastball, sits in the high 90s. He touches the 100 sometimes. Very, very good slider. He doesn't have the dominant third pitch that I think he's going to have to develop at some point if he really wants to kind of become a great, great starter. But he's got a 31.2% strikeout rate in the minors. It's there. The stuff is there. I don't expect him to break camp in the rotation, personally. I mean, they've got Lynn, they've got Lucas Giolito, they've got Dallas Keuchel. Then you've got Cease, Rodon, and Ronaldo Lopez. And given the fact that he hasn't really pitched in sort of like meaningful competitive baseball in 2.5 years at this point, and that he could benefit from sort of harnessing perhaps a third pitch that works a little better, my guess is that he starts the year in AAA. But I mean, the White Sox, they think they have a championship roster. They're going to put their best foot forward. And so for me, I think if Kopeck gets back to what everybody kind of thinks he can be, that he'll find himself up in the majors and in the rotation sooner rather than later. So I'd rather draft him here, have him on my team, rather than try to fight it out on the waiver wire later.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends too if like what your waiver wire is. If it's like a first come, first serve kind of thing, then I definitely understand drafting him. If it's a fob thing, you know, you got to be prepared to spend a good amount of money for him.
Yep.
Coming into last week, he was on roster resources, their number 5. And as you said, then now it's Carlos Rodon at their number 5, meaning that according to roster resource, which, you know, isn't always right. I think they do fantastic work. Sometimes, you know, you can't get any of this stuff perfect, obviously.
Of course.
But I'm curious to see. He's one of those guys that it's like, all right, I'm going to pay attention in spring training and see what's going on with him and let that dictate the price there. You know, you don't know what kind of command you're going to get. And, you know, I've talked about this too a few times. The White Sox are like the Rangers too, where it's like, was the last pitcher that they developed successfully Chris Sale? And when I said that, like, someone was like, well, no, it was Lucas Giolito. And I was like, yeah, not necessarily, because Lucas Giolito had his high school coach help him, who is now the pitching coach. And that's the counter argument, right? Is that pitching coach who worked with, obviously, I think it was Flaherty and Fried and Lucas Giolito, is he going to be able to kind of help Michael Kopeck with whatever it is? That's what I think fantasy owners, that's the question I think they need to gamble on when they're kind of figuring out whether or not they want to take that shot on Kopeck.
Right. And again, we're talking at this point, and it is very early February. Like, the way we feel about a lot of these guys and how we're going to be, where we're willing to draft them, is going to change dramatically once spring training starts. If I know he's in the rotation, I'm all over him for sure. At this point, I'm talking about even this, where I'm not expecting him to be in the rotation. And part of it was the Rodon signing. But again, I don't think I expect him to come back after not pitching at all in 2 seasons, basically, and have the command and have everything ready to go necessary to succeed in the majors right out of the gate. So for me, I'm expecting them to protect him a little bit, get him some seasoning down in AAA in the beginning, but he is going to be up at some point. So I'm willing to have him on my roster at that point. And again, it's fine. You're right. I mean, if you are an active manager and you are first come, first serve, or if you can get him off the waiver wire or use your, free agent budget or whatever you can, then, and you're confident in that, then go ahead and leave him out there. But for me, I'm willing to hold him. The upside is high enough where I'm willing to take him right out of the gate, even though I don't expect to get anything from him for at least like a month. All right. Yeah. Let's get to your next guy. Go ahead.
All right. I feel like to start with an apology. I was so high on this guy last year, and I listen, I have no sway or influence in this industry, but if anyone did draft him because of my enthusiasm, you have my utmost apologies. Luckily, I draft the guys that I get excited about, so I got burned too, and that's Matthew Boyd. Listen, I was wrong. I was excited. I saw the potential with all these new pitches, and then what happened? It was terrible. He did not have a great year. There are 2 really important factors to consider when talking about Matt Boyd this year. He was dealing with a hamstring injury all throughout summer camp, which forced him to tweak his mechanics on the fly. He said, physically, it affected me in terms of being able to repeat my delivery, but my mechanics moved and adapted to where I wasn't able to do the same things on the mound that I was used to. He said he could have gone on the IL, but he wanted to make all 12 of his starts. He obviously was dealing with a lot of injury last year. Even with that injury, even with all of the ailments and the terrible fastball slider performance, the changeup was one of the best changeups in baseball, and I cannot believe that. The pitch posted a 26% swinging strike rate. That was top 5. He threw 187 of them, which is, of course, a very small sample size relatively, but not terrible considering what we saw in 2020. These are guys that are free. If Matthew Boyd can fix what was his best pitch in, really for his career in that slider, which I think he can, if he can fix that pitch and show the velocity that he showed in spring training last year, which was actually like a 93 mile an hour fastball that touched 94 as opposed to 91, 92, and now he has this changeup to boot, that to me is really, really interesting because at this point in the draft, I don't think you're going to be able to find a guy who has 27, 28, 29, maybe even 30% K rate upside. Obviously, the ERA is never going to be, spotless. But if you're taking the Marco Gonzalez's or the Kyle Hendricks or the Zach Davies of the world, you can take these risks on these guys like Matthew Boyd.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was also dealing with a plantar fascia issue last year. I mean, he was just totally banged up. So I get it. You guys love Boyd, though. I know you guys have I think we talked about it last year. I know always you guys love Boyd. That's fine. And there is a lot of enticing things. Let me ask you something. Is there any chance at all? And again, you're almost kind of not throwing out the ERA, but you're just sort of like, I'm not expecting it to be that great or whatever. But is there any chance that he's going to somehow not be historically terrible at limiting opposing home runs? Is it possible? He allows 1.7 home runs per 9 innings in his career. You do that for a season and people are like, whoa, all right, that's worrisome a little bit. That's his career. And why is that? And is there any chance that he can get away from that? And if he does, I mean, his just general numbers are going to be much better. Is there any way that we can get away from this crazy homeritis that he has?
By law of averages, it has to happen. I mean, it's so funny because the excuses build up over time, right? So in 2 years ago when he gave up those historic home runs, it was over a particular game stretch, and he ended up giving up just as many home runs as Justin Verlander or something like that. It was crazy where like Verlander and him were in the same conversation. And it was like, well, you could look the other way for Verlander, but when it comes to Matthew Boyd, all he does is give up home runs and he's the worst person ever. And then for 2020, I believe he set the record for most first pitch home runs ever. Like it was like every game was just one home run. Like literally every game. He gave up a home run in every game but one, and that was oddly except Atlanta. That was the one he didn't give up a home run to. But actually I'm looking at the wrong year. Either way, he gave up all these first pitch home runs. Theoretically, that has to stop. I'm hoping that it has to stop. In 2019, he said it was just he would reach back to try and find more in his fastball, and then he would get beat. I'm hoping for my sanity. I'm hoping that it happens.
It's crazy because I was looking up because if you followed his career, like the home runs are a thing, and I looked. It's every year. We got something's got like you want to write it off to luck, be like, well, this will normalize, right? This will happen. It just doesn't. So if he ever can figure out a way to limit the home runs, hopefully sort of his, ERA would catch up to kind of the rest of us because he does have a bunch of, his slider. And again, you mentioned the changeup. They're very impressive. So he certainly has the upside. So again, where we are, which is like pick 300, there are no bad picks anyway. So no one will blame you if they go after Boyd. That's sort of the caveat I'll give here. I'm going to go to another guy who's going late. I actually don't know what his ADP is because we do a consensus ADP across several sites, and he's 287 among the 2 sites where he's being drafted. The other 2 sites don't even have an ADP for him, so maybe he's not even being drafted there. But that's Mitch Keller, a guy who, first of all, just for fun, if you look at how his major league career has unfolded, it's kind of hilarious when you just break down the both years. So acknowledge the oddity of it. 2019, he strikes out 12 batters per 9 innings. He walks just 3 batters per 9 innings, gives up just 1.13 homers per 9 innings, a 319 FIP, a 347 xFIP, and he winds up with a 7.13 ERA and a 183 WHIP. Last year, he missed some time with the oblique injury, but when he did pitch, he struck out only 6.65 batters per 9. He walked 7.48 batters per 9, 1.66 homers per 9, so Matthew Boyd territory, a 675 FIP, a 657 xFIP, and he winds up with a 291 ERA and a 125 WHIP. So that's just a funny sort of like, what are we supposed to even do with this poor guy who probably has absolutely no idea what he's supposed to do to have success right now in the majors? So for me, I'm basically ignoring what I've seen in the majors at this point because it's nonsense. Like it just doesn't make any sense really for the most part. There is this awesome dude who developed this metric called CSW called plus swinging strike rate. That's you, of course. Sorry. And it's been below average in the majors for Keller. So not a good sign, but it doesn't fit my narrative. So I'm ignoring it. Small sample sizes. I looked at my notes right back after the 2019 season and how optimistic I was coming in to last year, he has really good stuff, like just really, really good raw stuff. Mid-90s fastball. He's got a good slider, a good curveball. He has good control. His minor league numbers are excellent over 500 innings, 3.12 ERA, 115 whip, 25.5% K rate. He had a little bit of a dip in his velocity last year. I'm assuming that's just kind of due to the vagaries of like the shortened season or maybe his injury, because he lost like roughly 1.5 miles on his fastball. So I'm going to trust what his stuff looks like, and it's good. Now, the Pirates are terrible. Wins are going to be really hard to come by, but them being terrible has the benefit of meaning he can just stick in that rotation and iron out any problems he's got. He's not going to have to worry about losing his rotation spot. And as we have mentioned like 8 times so far on this show, the NL Central, you're going to face a lot of poor offenses in the end. So for me, again, we're talking about guys who are going around pick 300. So there's no downside. Like if they stink, you can cut them. But for me, man, I liked Keller coming into last year. I'm willing to write it off. And I'm kind of hoping that he can repeat the success he had in the minors.
Yeah, I mean, 2 quick hits. I mean, the fastball, curveball have some pretty elite spin mirroring, which is really good to see. It's only going to make those pitches more effective. And then to really drive it home, he ended the year with 11 innings of no-hit ball.
Yep.
That's insane. He also walked 8.
Yes, that's why actually it's funny. The 8 walks are why I didn't bring that up, because I was like, I could bring this up, but I feel like that's cheating because he walked 8 batters. But yes, absolutely. Finished quote unquote strong. So yeah, I like him. Again, a guy this late, there's plenty of upside. But again, if it doesn't work out at this point, like we've said, like whatever, move on. It's fine. That's the beauty of drafting guys in this range who have the upside about the guys we're talking about. All right, let's get to your next guy. Who do you got?
The next guy that I have on my list is Josh Lindbloom. So for Lindbloom, it's so funny. He's got some really, really exciting stuff overall. And we saw the first year in the MLB last year, and it obviously wasn't fantastic. 5.16 ERA, 3.88 FIP, and a 4.09 SIERA with a 4.24 xFIP was pretty exciting. All those numbers tell different stories, and I feel like I'm most inclined to believe the SIERA. That Josh Lindblom is probably a low 4 ERA pitcher who actually has more strikeout upside than we think. 8.4% walk rate, a little bit surprising to me. He's usually been more of a control guy, so I wouldn't be surprised to see that take a step back in 2021. He's been vocal online about some of the changes he's focused on in the offseason, and they're exciting to me. He added spin efficiency to his 4-seamer. The Rapsodo outputs have been near 99%. Those are probably going to take a step back, as they usually do over the course of a season. Not over the course of a season, that sticks with you, but in game, it's going to be different. Lindblom sat at about 77% last year, so that's a big jump. Considering he's at 94th percentile on actual spin, that's really going to benefit him. Didn't have a fastball that featured a particularly high amount of gyro, it would seem, and adding more effective backspin to the pitch is going to benefit the pitch. He's just got a lot of pitches in his arsenal that I think could benefit him. So, we keep saying it over and over again, but at this point, you're looking for that upside. A lot of people are going to be looking young. I'm looking in the opposite direction. I think if we see the walk rate come down, if we see some of the pitches that he's saying are going to actually improve, there's a lot of nice upside there.
Out of curiosity, because I know you were on ESPN broadcast, right, talking about the KBO last year, right? Did you follow the KBO? Because he was in the KBO for a while. Did you follow the KBO really before that, or were you just getting into it then? Because if so, have you followed his career when he was over there?
I have not. No, the quarantine really got me into the KBO. I was just kind of fiending for baseball, and then I just thought it was so funny that they were playing a brand of baseball that kind of old baseball fans yearn for. Right. They're playing, in many ways, perfect baseball. It's incredibly fast-paced. It is much more contact-oriented. It's not about 3 true outcomes. They bat flip walks. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's exactly what everyone wants the MLB to be. So I kind of fell in love with it and turned into a Lotte Giants fan this past season, but before that, no, I was not as into it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, anyway, I agree with you on Lindblom. I mean, swinging strike rate of 12.4% last year, strikeout rate of 27.2%. I was going to ask you, but you brought it up, the walk rate that would seem kind of just random to me at 8.4%. And again, just something that seemed like it's just like, oh, this is a bizarre kind of result of the shortened season. So you are basically willing to assume that that's just going to regress to, he's never really struggled with his control that badly. You're just assuming that that's going to probably get back to normal levels, right?
Yeah, I think the thing is too, like, these are such different brands of baseball. And I'm really excited to see what happens now that he's adapting back to MLB. And like, one of the things I think that I realized while watching KBO that I didn't really fully grasp is like, pitchers are going to change their arsenal to benefit them. You know what I mean? Obviously, they're going to do what's best for them, and that could be increased curveball usage. That could be different ways in which they approach the fastball. So I think I would love to see what this year is going to look like, knowing what he knows now about pitching back in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have him, and I do agree that there is upside, and it is somebody who I think he's going 345th. Like, he's ignored.
That's crazy.
Nuts, right? Yeah, exactly. So I like it as well. It's my type of player. Also, I'm going to get to my last guy. If you've got one more, we can get to him after that. My last guy is Ryan Yarbrough. He's going the 77th pitcher, 287th overall, so a little higher than a couple of the guys that we talked about. He's weird, right? Because he doesn't always start with the way the Rays kind of do things. He doesn't strike out a ton of batters, but he's just really good. Like, he doesn't walk a ton of guys, he doesn't give a lot of homers. He forces batters to make consistently really, really, really weak contact. He's been in the majors for 3 years. He has been in the 96th percentile or better each year in terms of limiting average exit velocity and hard hit rate. The MLB average for average exit velocity, 88.3 miles an hour. His career mark, 84.8 miles per hour. Average hard hit rate in MLB, 34.9%. His career mark is 26.3%. And those are crazy numbers if you did it over a season. I mean, that's his entire career. And what I like about him is that he's started throwing his changeup a little bit more every single year so far. And he's much more of sort of a cutter and a changeup guy. And the best part is if you do the overlay of them and you see they're like identical, and one just moves one way and the other moves the other way. And so it's really difficult for batters to kind of square it up and get it. So the weak contact that he allows, it's not going anywhere. He plays for the Rays. They're a smart pitching organization. So it's only going to get better, I think. And nobody really wants Ryan Yarbrough. You know what I mean? They heard like, oh, what? That guy, he doesn't strike out that many guys, right? This is sort of the bias, I think, that fantasy managers come in against pitchers who don't strike out a ton of batters, right? I mean, that's part of what it is. But if you build your team the right way, you can really make a profit by drafting these guys that go way lower than their numbers say they should, just because they don't have huge strikeout rates. So Yarbrough is a guy who I'm targeting pretty much everywhere, and I'm just going to stick in the back end of my rotation and enjoy the rewards.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, I think we're finally going to see a year where the Rays aren't going to do what they usually do with him because they can't really afford to, right? I mean, he's their theoretically third pitcher right now, because I think it goes Glasnow and then Chris Archer. And then
he's got to be above Archer at this point. I mean, I know that's what it says on Roster Resource, right? But he's their number 2 at this point, I would think.
Yeah. Either way, like I just don't see him being the guy that they're using a starter for, because that's going to be like what Josh Fleming is all about. But like, I agree with that, and I think that the sinker changeup is really good. He did something really interesting too, where he brought the changeup out of the zone more so than ever last year, and it didn't necessarily benefit him in good ways. But what's so tricky about that is the sinker had some of the best results. Right, it went from like a 8 run value, which is like similar to p-val, to -4, and that's obviously cumulative, but that's still pretty wild. And you already brought up the how well he does in terms of limiting contact. So sometimes, like, I feel like, while the swinging strike rate might have dropped and wasn't a career high for him on the changeup, that could be a risk reward thing, or it could be something you're willing to kind of give up if it's going to lead to this great of a sinker performance. I'm also like, it just sounds so dumb, and it's like counter to anything that we dig so much into the numbers and stuff, but like sometimes it's like, hey, the Rays trust him. Okay, I trust
that's
him.
Right. I mean, that's right. The Rays are a smart organization. If I have made that argument before. I'm like, look, if the Rays say it's okay, then it's okay. That is really where I go. But you mentioned it. It's not as if the changeup performed exceptionally well, like above what it usually does, but it was just adding more of it kind of accentuated the rest of his arsenal. So again, a boring guy. Nobody likes him because, again, he doesn't strike out any batters. So you don't need that all the time. You just don't. Get guys who are going to stabilize your overall numbers, who you can feel comfortable throwing out there every single week, every single game that they start, and that's a guy like Yarbrough. All right. You got anybody else? You got one more for me?
I mean, maybe the really super quick Garrett Richards. I mean, like, he's going relatively free right now. If he can put together a bunch of innings, like, or even if he could throw 80, 90, 100, which he might be able to do in Boston, he's got such nice upside. There's really nice stuff in terms of that arsenal. It might be worth a really late round flyer there. Yeah,
I mean, I think there's very little downside with Richards in terms of what he's going to do, right? When he's actually pitching. He hasn't topped 76 in the third innings since 2015. That's really all there is. And I always feel like he should strike out more batters than he does. But in the end, he's a guy, you talk about free, he's picked like 400 at this point. So it's like, if you draft him, people are like, what are you doing? But so long as he's healthy, he is going to be somebody who you can start more often than not. So I do like the call. All right. That's gonna do it. I love it. I mean, perfect timing in terms of what we did. I'm gonna be on the lookout for. Remember, leave a review for the show, Alex. Mention our great guest.
I will.
And then enter for that Manny Machado jersey. Falexander Ast is definitely coming in trying to win it. But remind everybody, you do fantastic work. And I know I feel bad because I talked to Nick and I was just like, Nick does fantastic work at the end of the show. But you guys over at Pitcher List, and again, the other thing I'll say about it is everybody who I've met, I told Nick this, I'll tell you this as well. Anybody who I've ever talked to at Pitcher List, and you meet people just because you get in the same leagues and stuff like that, or you just interact on Twitter, to a person, fantastic. Like, what you guys have built there is wonderful. I love it. I think it's a great place. Just remind everybody a little bit about where they can see you more.
Yeah, and thank you for those kind words. That really does it truly does mean a lot to us. We really appreciate that. It keeps us going. You can find me on Twitter at AlexFast8. Just released my top 100, so feel free to go on there and let's talk about it. Had some great conversations about why people think I'm too high or low on other people, and I'm just there to talk about it and try and help people win their leagues. I'm not going to be winning mine because I'm not very good, but I want to try and help you win yours.
All right, well that's fair. I don't know if you want to go out and advertise the fact that you're not a very good fantasy player, but I appreciate it. But yes, again, this year more than ever, I think you're gonna see huge differences in rankings, right? Because we are kind of dealing with this unprecedented situation of how much weight do we give what we saw in 2020. So I think more than ever, you're going to see a lot of different opinions out there. So it's great that you publish yours. It's a terrible process to try to write. It's so difficult to try to figure out what it is. But again, I have mine up as well. So maybe you and I one day will compare. We'll see where we land on that. But for sure, in the meantime, thank you everybody for listening. Again, don't forget to enter the contest. Just leave a review for the show on Apple Podcasts or Castbox, and then go to fantasypros.com/MLB contest to submit their review. In the meantime, we'll be back next week with another episode, unfortunately from somebody I'm sure who is not from Pitcher List, but it was a great run that you guys had. But in the meantime, enjoy your weekend. We'll talk to you next week. Looking for useful content, fantasy relevant information, and the data that can help your team win? Make sure to subscribe to our Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. And while you're at it, don't forget to follow us over on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at FantasyPros so you get all the information you need to dominate your leagues all season long.